B-A-T. It's in the name.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor podcast with Ben and Travis. On today's episode, we have with us Scott Keiser. Scott is an assistant vice president for claims of an international insurance corporation that's based out of Australia. Scott himself lives in the New Orleans metro area, and they have been recovering from Hurricane Ian. He was with us on the show last year and talked a little bit about that, but he joins us again, talk to us a little bit more about hurricane relief and recovery and other parts of that, and we're excited to have him on here. Scott is also a deacon at the Hickory Knoll Church of Christ, and we'll get to the interview with him after a few of these messages.
This episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast is brought to you by the 3rd annual Bella's Snowball 5K and 1 Mile Fun Run on Saturday, November 12th at 8 a.m. during the host of Christmas Past weekend in Fayetteville, Tennessee. November is National Adoption Awareness Month, and proceeds from this race will help Luke and Heidi Eakes with their adoption travel expenses and support the mission of Always Endure. This event is fun for the whole family. Meeting Queen Elsa, face painting, bubble zone, and candy are just a few things to look forward to. We want to see everyone dressed up. Ruffled shirt, tutu, tights, something with a little Christmas flair. What will you wear to the ball? To register, go to alwaysendure.com and click the Events tab. Thank you for helping to remove a financial barrier so a child can gain their forever home. All right, I'm Travis Creasy. That's All-Pro counselor Ben Hayes.
What's happening?
And as promised, we have Scott Keiser, who I know Ben gave the intro of all his technical terms and positions that he holds, but he'll always be a good roommate to me. So I'm having kind of a flashback here of the Freed Hardeman days, since I have both of my former roommates that are still talking to me. So I consider that a success. Scott, you look like you're doing a lot better than when you were with us last time, since you joined us from the road, exiting. I think you were heading to Georgia, maybe.
Yeah, we were in South Georgia, 20 minutes from my in-laws' house the last time we spoke. So, yeah, we're back in the house. We moved back in a week after Labor Day, so just a little over a year after the storm, and we're mostly back to normal. We're getting close.
I'm just impressed that you're outside and there's not mosquitoes carrying you away.
I have 2 fans blowing.
That helps. As Ben mentioned in the intro, that you're working with insurance claims, and I'm sure those abound, not only there in Louisiana, but now for our friends and a lot of brothers and sisters in Christ in the state of Florida and around that area. The Friday Refresh question of the day, the Friday Refresh comes out every other Friday. The All-Pro counselor Ben Hayes hosts that 3 to 5 minute motivational podcast every other Friday. You can find all of that, of course, at benandtravis.com. But the Friday Refresh question of the day, Scott, is tell us a little bit about what you do and how long you've been doing it, and what the difference is between what you do and I think you use the term a public adjuster, or maybe I got that backwards.
No, you got it right. You got it right. I have 20 years handling claims in all aspects of commercial industry. A lot of that has to do with general liability. Commercial liability is what businesses have. I also have handled legal malpractice claims, construction claims, and now I handle claims for the maritime industry and the oil and gas industries, which are prevalent down here. Now, the difference between a public adjuster and what I do, in simple terms, is that a public adjuster works for the public. Their clients are homeowners, or they could be business owners who are looking for someone to work for them. I work for the insurance carrier, and I do the best job to my ability to be able to stand in the shoes of the policyholders that have insurance policies from my company. But that's the big difference, is I work for the insurance carrier. A public adjuster works directly for the policyholder and is paid from the proceeds that the policyholder receives from the insurance company. The other thing to note is that I am licensed in 3 states, um, and I have 20 years in the business. But again, just to reiterate, I'm not a public adjuster, so I don't work for the public, and laws are different in each state. So I imagine your podcast is probably very popular in the Southeast, but there are state-specific laws that differ between Louisiana, Alabama, whatever. And we'll get into some of that later on. But those are just the key things to keep in mind, that this is marginal insurance advice. It's worth every dime you paid for it, right? So, just keep that in mind, that if there's any insurance people out there listening to this and you say, well, Scott, you're wrong about that. Well, it's possible that I could be, depending on what state you are in.
Tell us a little bit about maybe a couple of things that you think people, in Florida that are dealing with this right now, what some of the people I know last time you talked about different phases, there's the
Right.
recovery and, all the different, I don't remember exactly all of them, but the initial response and then the long-term recovery and stuff. So what do you think are some of the biggest things right now that need to be talked about?
So I think from an insurance perspective, especially those that were just hit by the hurricane that hit Florida and South Carolina, is just a kind of a basis of what is insurance. I mean, we throw that term out all the time, but what is it? My simple definition for insurance is a transfer of risk in exchange for an annual fee or a premium with certain conditions. And so that's, transfer of risk is the biggest thing. And so for those people in Florida and other states that are hit by storms or floods or whatever, if they don't have insurance for their loss of their house, their business, their cars, boats, whatever, then their only recourse is whatever grace that they can get from FEMA as far as a loan from the taxpayer, the American taxpayer, and then whatever, relief they might be able to get from friends and stuff like that. So there's 2 big policies that, especially with hurricane claims, that we probably should talk about. Auto and boats and all that stuff, most people know how to deal with that. But the big 2 items here are homeowners insurance and then flood insurance. And there's a definitive difference between the 2. The biggest difference between homeowners and flood insurance is that homeowners insurance does not cover flood in any form or fashion. So if you have storm surge, if you have a creek that rises or a river that rises and floods a major, area, and you don't have flood insurance, your homeowner's insurance will not cover it. Your homeowner's insurance really only covers theft. It covers fire and lightning. Some states it'll cover earthquake. In Florida, there are some exclusions for sinkholes, but you might be able to buy that in your insurance package, coverage for sinkholes. So that's those are the big things with homeowners. And then with flood, the only people that you can purchase flood insurance from are your insurance agents, your brokers, and those, of course, are backed by the federal government. Now, what many policyholders felt during the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina here in 2005 is probably going to be very similar to what these folks in Florida and maybe South Carolina are going to experience, which is they have coverage that's going to come into play from 2 different policies, the homeowners and the flood, because the flood only covers flood. So, for instance, the flood comes into your home at the 2-foot level. Well, the flood insurance will come in. They might say, okay, we're going to cover your whole loss from the 2-foot level, maybe the 3. It just kind of depends what the adjuster determines. But we're going to cover the loss from 2 feet line and below. Then your homeowner's policy will come in for wind. If you have wind coverage in a hurricane, they'll come in and they'll provide coverage for everything from the 2-foot level and above. Problem with that is, you get one policy and the other policies sometimes don't overlap in coverage, and there's an argument over which policy should provide the coverage. And that's when the policyholders, the homeowners and the business owners, that's when we get frustrated.
I would assume, I mean, a couple of things I was thinking about with that is one, you're still going to have deductibles on both of those things. So
That's correct.
you're still going to probably end up being out some money with it. But I'm also assuming too that at least before Katrina, a lot of people didn't have flood insurance. Is that correct?
That's true, and unfortunately, it's still true today. And that has a lot to do with the real estate market. I'm just speaking broadly again, right? Broadly in broad terms. So we have allowed, as a society in Louisiana, we have allowed people to build homes, not camps, but actual homes in floodplains.
Mhm.
And those properties have been sold as no flood zones. Well, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has dammed up rivers, has dammed up floodplains, and so that water now goes to specific areas into those floodplains a whole lot more than it used to. So people who never thought they had to buy a flood policy are now getting flooded, and they're throwing their hands up in the air because I was told I didn't need to buy a flood policy.
Yeah.
So things are changing along that line. The other thing, especially for those who are listening or who are viewing us that are high wage earners and have expensive property, they need to realize that the flood insurance program only provides coverage for buildings up to $250,000 and then contents for $100,000. So that's another issue in New Orleans with homes that were valued at, say, $750,000 and they were a total loss. Then there's a huge gap potentially in coverage and the loss that they have. Now, at the time of Katrina, the FEMA flood policy was much different. It was $150,000 for the structure. I don't remember what it was for contents, but at least that has increased.
So they can't be covered, or they can just only be covered up to a certain amount.
So the maximum that FEMA will cover is $250,000. Now, you might be able to buy what's called a surplus policy on top of that, which means it's not a domestic insurance policy. But anyway, that's kind of getting into graduate level information.
Well, if that's, but from the standpoint of some of the houses, I mean, I've seen some of the damage that's been done. I mean, I remember some there, but also some of the damage done around the Orlando area and along the eastern coast of Florida. Those houses are not very cheap. So I would assume that there's a lot of so you don't think about sometimes the high wage earners and those in those houses being in need, but at that point, if that's their property, then I'm sure that it's affecting everyone financially.
That's correct. It doesn't matter how rich or how poor you are. And, again, the flood policy will work on the flood and the homeowner's policy will work on the wind. So, the idea is you package the two policies together and hopefully you have enough coverage to go along. But you're absolutely right. There is a deductible to come into account.
As a person who does collect a lot of stuff, memorabilia and things, probably not anything worth very much money, I've always heard that you need pictures of things like that to prove that you have those things. And if anybody follows my Instagram account, you're probably like, man, all this guy does is brag about all his memorabilia. But there is a purpose to the madness. I'm not just showing off. I'm trying to keep records of what I got and what I don't have. So I guess that's two questions. Talk a little bit about the mold impact of that you sent that information.
Sure.
And then of anything valuable, would you recommend making that you have pictures of that, or you have a list or something that proves you've got those things or had those things?
Okay, sure. So let me start off with your second part first, with the list and all that stuff. And I'll kind of go back to the beginning of that, which would be how to present a claim. So if anyone that's watching or listening, all you have to do is Google something called the Accord Loss Form, not the Honda Accord. It's the Accord Loss Form. It's ACORD. And on that, it's the same thing that insurance broker or an agent will use to fill out whatever your claim is. The better ones fill it completely. The ones that don't do it as well, or they're overwhelmed, just put in the very basic information. So that'll be the first thing is when you have time, if you have interest, look at that. But the second thing is you're absolutely right, Travis. You have to document everything because as an insurance professional, unfortunately, I can't just accept your word that you have the 1992 game used football when Alabama beat Penn State in the Superdome. I just can't take that at face value.
Oh, come on, man.
So I've got to have a photograph. When it comes to something like that, especially sports memorabilia, not only a photograph, but a certificate that says it's authentic, something that says how much you paid for it. When it comes to stuff like that, it's very difficult, even with expensive artwork. It's very difficult to come up with what a value of something like that is. And again, we're kind of getting into graduate level stuff here, but you can buy a specific policy that covers collectibles, artwork, stuff like that. And if they're valuable enough, you can enter into what's called an agreed value on each of those items so that all of them are itemized in your policy. You know what you'll get if it's damaged. The insurance company will know what they pay out. But photographs of anything, really, I'm talking about clothes, I'm talking about electronics. This is what I had to do following Hurricane Ian. Another thing that's very valuable is we all have accounts at these big box stores or online chains where we can go through and we can see our receipts from years past. Those are very valuable. You need to get those receipts, you need to download them, and you need to send them on to your insurance adjuster to prove that you purchased these items. And the best thing to do, and again, it took Laura and I probably half a day or better, is we photographed as much of our property as we could individually. So we're talking about one picture of the TV, one picture of every book that was damaged. It gets to be tedious and it gets to be somewhat overwhelming, but that's what we have to do because unfortunately there is fraud in the insurance business, and unfortunately it's that reason that I can't take at face value what collectibles you have. Now you mentioned mold. So mold is usually explicitly excluded from every homeowner's policy because it's expensive to get rid of and it just pops up everywhere. Now, having said that, if you have mold as a result of a covered loss, then it would be covered. So in my instance, and you guys have seen pictures, the instance of my house, the ceiling drywall in my master bedroom actually caved in. There was mold everywhere. So my job as a homeowner, and again, this is where it becomes tedious and it's time consuming and it's not fun, is my job as a homeowner, as a policy holder, is to mitigate as much of that damage as I can. That means to keep it from getting worse. So in the sense of a hurricane, the mold will be covered because it's as a result of a covered loss. That's wind and water. But if you're renovating your bathroom and you find mold on all the 2x4s behind the drywall, it's going to be probably a claim that would be denied.
Yeah.
Because you failed. I hate to say it, even as an insurance professional, but the argument is you failed to maintain your property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And failure to do maintenance is not covered under a policy. There's two tools that a homeowner can use, and these are the same tools that an insurance professional uses. There are two tools that you can use to help support your claim for moisture in your home. The first one is called a moisture meter. They're relatively inexpensive, under $100. I think the one I picked out was $50 or $60. But anyway, it has two probes on it, and you stick it in your wall, and you press the power button, and it tells you how much moisture is in your home. Now, keep in mind that the relative moisture in your home should be between 5 and 12%. And if you get a good meter, it'll tell you. Anything above 17%, you really need to, you might be able to dry out with a professional mitigation company with a dehumidifier, a bunch of fans, and all that stuff. And so the 17% level is, kind of a case by case level. But the published material indicates that if you have moisture in your home for a prolonged period of time and your drywall moisture content is 17%, it really all needs to be replaced. Well, Travis, if you have the ability to show those images that I sent you of my home, I have 2 photographs of my home where it looks like, it's been wet, but it's dry. And I have comparing photographs where if you use a second tool, that's the infrared thermal imaging camera. It's a handheld device. It's relatively expensive, but you can rent them from the big box home improvement stores. And they will show you the temperature readings behind the drywall. And the reason that's important is because the moisture meter is only intended to measure the moisture in your drywall. The probes are simply not long enough to measure the moisture in your 2x4s and in the insulation behind that drywall. And so if you're like me and it took you a week just to get into your home, and then it took a total of 2 weeks for a field adjuster to come inspect your home after the loss, then you might run into a situation where the moisture meter on the drywall is reading, say, a high normal. But if you use the thermal imaging camera, it's going to show you that your moisture reading is off the charts because it's stuck in the insulation. So you need to, as a homeowner, I'm not telling you how to get over on the insurance company. I'm just trying to explain to you how important it is to use these tools that are available to you, and so that if you have hidden damage, that you can get it fixed.
Ben and I are thankful for all of our first responders and excited to sponsor the Back the Blue event this Friday, October 21st from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. at Muscle Shoals High School in Alabama. This event is hosted by Men's Wellness of North Alabama, and it will feature live music from Dixie Mafia and the Midnighters, along with food trucks, silent auction, and bounce houses. Donations upon admission and all proceeds will go towards medical gear for local law enforcement. Make your plans to bring the whole family and back the blue.
Some of the things that we're talking about, may not ever be a concern for somebody, say, in North Alabama in the same way that it is for you guys. I mean, there's obviously floods. We've had some in Muscle Shoals. It's literally a flood zone, or was at one time.
Right.
But, there may be some people who are listening that's not as helpful to them as what are some of the things that you can remind us that maybe is still needed in New Orleans area, Louisiana from last time, or over in the Florida region. What do you think? Because I know I had people calling saying, where can we donate clothes? And I was like, most of the time donating clothes, at least in my experience with tornadoes and other things, they pile up and they never get used. So
right.
What are your suggestions about helping if somebody wants to help?
So as we speak right now for the people in Florida, I think the easiest thing to do would find a congregation of the Lord's people to send money to. They're closest to the action, as it were, and they're going to know the needs of the people a whole lot better than we are. And if you're one of those people, like, I would love to be able to take a week off of work and go help, but the roads are still not flooded out, but there's debris all over the place. Wow. The police are having their hands full of looters. The last thing they really need is for outsiders that are not with a specific group just going down there and, going willy-nilly. So I would say, since we're the Lord's people, I would find a trusted congregation to send money down that way. That's really the easiest thing to do for us giving. And it really is the best thing for those on the receiving end, because the needs of the families vary different. If you have wind damage, you're going to be able to get into your home a whole lot faster than if you have water damage. I mean, if you can send non-perishable food down there, that's food and water and money.
I know that you've got a solid foundation and belief and trust in the Lord, and I'm sure your kids see that in you and Laura. But how do you handle something like this? My kids, we don't watch the news unless there's a tornado coming. And so right. They call that the tornado TV. But I mean, how do you handle that with kids? How did your parents handle it with you living down right. there and kind of, it's different for people who've been on through multiple hurricanes where I might lose my mind and go crazy. How do you
Sure.
handle that with your kiddos and
So
yeah.
this might be because of the news, as you mentioned. This might seem unusual to those that don't live here, but this Hurricane Ian was the first hurricane in my 42 years of life that really destroyed any home that I was living in to the extent that it did. It's true for my parents, and it's true for Kevin, my brother, although he had much less damage than the rest of us. So that's, number one is, yes, we live in a hurricane area, but we don't get struck by a major hurricane every year, number one. Number two is, we put our faith in the Lord, right? Not stuff. So although we value some things, especially like pictures and stuff like that, that's not, my faith is not in this house. It's not in my stuff, because it can be gone in a heartbeat. And then number three is to have a strong support system. I mean, my parents were, we were helping my parents, but they were helping us. Laura's parents were awesome in helping us at first with keeping the kids for a week by themselves while we drove 8 hours down the road back home to get all the stuff figured out in our house. But to me, the secret really isn't much of a secret. I think you said it right. You just have to rely on the Lord. Our temporary home that we were in for a little over a year was 30 minutes from our current house. We didn't realize it was going to take that long for our house to get back to normal. Long story short, we fired a contractor because we thought he was taking too long and all this other stuff, which is not an unusual story for anyone else either. But because of that, Laura was having to drive the kids 30 minutes one way to school and then back. So she was doing that twice a day. So, what's the secret to overcoming all of that aggravation and the stress and all that? Really is just putting your faith in the Lord and then having something to do. For me, it was work. For Laura, it was taking care of the kids. And we would, once we got the house gutted and everything else like that, and we started moving, I was working during the day. I would come home and eat with the family, and then I would come back to my house and paint. I'm still painting. I think I'll be painting until we sell the house or I die. I mean, I don't know. Just painting.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.